David's Saturday morning in his peaceful garden was shattered when his jittery neighbor Greg confessed an obsession with David's wife and handed over secret footage that revealed a man frequently visiting while David was at work. But the truth behind the betrayal? No one saw it coming. David liked his Saturdays quiet. He'd rise early, sip black coffee on the back porch of his suburban Chicago home, and tend to his modest garden, a patch of green he'd carefully built after years of city life. For a man who spent his weekdays working IT support in a busy office, the calm meant everything. But that morning, the peace cracked open. Crunching footsteps on gravel turned his head. Greg, his next-door neighbor, approached. Not unusual. Greg had lived there for years. But something was different. He looked off. His shoulders were tense, his hands shoved into his hoodie pockets, and his eyes darted around like he was afraid someone was watching. "Morning," David greeted, standing up and brushing dirt off his palms. "Everything okay?" Greg didn't answer right away. He stopped a few feet short, lowered his voice. "David, can we talk? I mean, seriously talk." David frowned. Their relationship had always been surface level. Small talk over fence repairs and trash pickup schedules. Greg wasn't the type to ask for anything deeper. "Yeah, sure. What's going on?" Greg hesitated, scanning the yard again. "It's about Rachel." Rachel, David's wife. That name coming from Greg's mouth already felt wrong. Before David could ask what he meant, Greg continued, words tumbling out. "I've been watching her, not in a creepy way. Well, maybe it is. But I've been recording her. For a while now. I didn't know how else to deal with it. I think I'm in love with her." David froze. It didn't compute. "What are you saying?" he asked slowly, trying to keep his voice from rising. Greg pulled his phone from his pocket, hands shaking. "I didn't plan to tell you, but you need to see this." With a few swipes, Greg brought up videos, dozens of them. Rachel watering plants, talking on the phone, sitting on the porch with a book, all taken from behind fences, across driveways, through zoom lenses. David's stomach churned. But then he noticed something else. In some of the clips, a man, someone David didn't recognize, walked right through the front door of David's own house, always when David would have been at work. Sometimes he stayed for hours. "That guy," Greg said, pointing, "he's been showing up often. I thought she might be cheating on you." David didn't say a word. He just stared at the screen, the footage looping. The camera was shaky, grainy, but there was no denying the scenes. The man. Rachel letting him in like it was normal. Greg lowered the phone, guilt washing over his face. "I know I crossed a line, but I thought you deserved to know. I didn't want to hurt you, I swear." David clenched his jaw, the words struggling to form. "You've been spying on my wife? For how long?" "Almost a year," Greg admitted. "I started because I couldn't stop thinking about her. But then that guy kept showing up and I thought, I don't know. I thought maybe I could protect her, or protect you." David's fists were balled at his sides, his heart pounding. "You invaded our lives. You think this helps?" Greg said nothing, just stood there, shrinking under the weight of his confession. David snatched the phone from his hand and replayed the videos, this time focusing. The man wasn't just passing through. He was being welcomed. Hugged sometimes. Relaxed, familiar. Not a stranger, clearly, but not someone David had ever met. Without another word, David shoved the phone back into Greg's chest and turned to go inside. "You need to ask her," Greg called after him. "You need to find out who he is." David didn't answer. He closed the door behind him, and for the first time in years, the house didn't feel like home. It felt like a place full of questions. Rachel wasn't back yet. She was supposed to be out shopping, maybe grabbing lunch with her sister, but now every moment of her absence felt loaded. David sat at the kitchen table, the clock ticking louder than usual. When she finally walked in, casual as always, placing her purse on the counter, David didn't move. She caught his stare immediately. "Everything okay?" she asked, sensing the shift in the room. "Sit down," David said flatly. "We need to talk." Rachel sat down slowly, eyes fixed on David. "What's going on?" David pulled out his phone and played one of the videos Greg had shown him. He turned the screen toward her, saying nothing. Her expression shifted from confusion to disbelief as the footage played out. When it ended, she placed the phone on the table. "Who did this?" she asked, voice sharp. "Who's been filming me?" "That's not what I'm asking," David said. "I want to know who he is. The man coming into our house while I'm gone." Rachel looked at him for a long moment. "You need to trust me." He stood pacing. "You're asking for trust when someone's been entering our home without a word from you? That's not how this works, Rachel. I can't explain it right now." "Try." "I mean it," she said, staying calm. "It's complicated. You're jumping to conclusions. There's nothing complicated about it. Either you tell me or I'm left with what I saw." Rachel crossed her arms. "You're not hearing me. I'm asking you to believe in me, even if I can't give you the answer you want, right now." David stared at her, anger rising, but something else underneath. Fear. "Is there something I should be afraid of?" She didn't respond. That night, David didn't sleep. Her vague answers replayed in his head. He couldn't tell if she was protecting someone or lying, and Greg's involvement made it worse. A neighbor obsessed enough to spy for months? The whole situation had spiraled past anything rational. By morning, David made a decision. He didn't go to work. Instead, he parked down the street with a clear view of his own home. It felt wrong, watching her, but he needed to see what she wouldn't say. The hours passed slowly. Rachel moved through her day like it was any other, watering plants, checking the mailbox, stepping onto the porch with coffee. But just before noon, a familiar car pulled up, the same one from Greg's videos. David's heart rate spiked. The man stepped out carrying a small duffel bag. Tall, broad shoulders, purposeful stride. He rang the bell. Rachel answered almost instantly. She didn't look surprised. She looked relieved. They spoke briefly. Then she stepped aside and let him in. David gripped the steering wheel, rage boiling just beneath the surface. But he held back. He needed to know more. After about an hour, the man came back out, scanned the street quickly, then drove off. David waited a few minutes, then walked inside. Rachel was in the kitchen. "Who was that?" he asked. She turned slowly. "I told you to trust me." "Not anymore." "Who is he?" She paused, then said calmly, "He's my brother." David blinked. "What?" "My brother," she repeated. "Mark. You never told me you had a brother." "Because he's been in prison for the last 10 years, she said. David stood frozen. "For what?" "Theft," she said. "When he was younger, he ran with the wrong crowd. He made mistakes. He paid for them." "And you didn't tell me any of this?" Rachel exhaled. "Because I knew how it would sound. And I didn't want you judging him before you met him. He's trying to start over." David rubbed his forehead. "You've been letting him into our house for months, and I'm just finding out now. Because of Greg." Rachel's face darkened. "Greg's been spying on me? That's who filmed me?" David nodded. "He's obsessed with you." Rachel looked away. "I should have told you. I thought I could manage it on my own. But Mark has no one else. I couldn't turn him away." David struggled to take it all in. A secret sibling with a criminal past hiding in their home. And the source of this revelation? A neighbor with a camera and an unhealthy fixation. "Is there anything else I should know?" David asked. Rachel hesitated. "Mark didn't just steal. He was involved with some dangerous people. He tried to cut ties before he went to prison, but they haven't forgotten him." David stared at her. "You brought someone into our home who's being hunted." "He's not dangerous, David. He's scared, and I was trying to help." David sat down heavily. "You say you were protecting him, but what about us? I know I messed up, but I didn't cheat. I swear to you I didn't." David wanted to believe her, but too many things didn't add up. And one thing was certain. His wife had been hiding a man in their house. Whether it was family or not, that changed everything. That night, while Rachel was in the shower, David picked up her phone. He hated what he was doing, but trust had already cracked. He opened her call logs. One number stood out. No name. Just a string of digits that kept showing up over the past few months. He copied it. The next day, during his lunch break, he called the number from a payphone near his office. "Hello?" The voice on the other end was deep, cautious. David hesitated. "This is David, Rachel's husband." Silence, then, "I'm Mark." David swallowed hard. "She says you're her brother, that you just got out." Mark's voice softened. That's true. I've been trying to stay off the radar. I didn't want to be a burden to anyone. Then why all the secrecy? She wanted to protect you, and honestly, I didn't want you to know either. I've made a lot of mistakes, but I'm trying to fix them. David listened. Mark didn't sound threatening, but there was a weight in his voice, regret maybe, or exhaustion. If everything's so innocent, David said, why does it feel like you're both hiding more? Mark paused. Because sometimes the truth isn't simple, but Rachel never betrayed you. She's the only reason I'm still standing. David hung up without another word. He didn't know who to believe anymore. But one thing was clear. This wasn't over. David sat in his parked car, hands resting on the steering wheel, staring blankly ahead. The call with Mark kept replaying in his mind. The man didn't sound like a criminal, but he also didn't sound like someone entirely free of his past. That night, David didn't confront Rachel directly. He waited, observed, watched how she acted, how often she checked her phone, how quickly she stepped into the hallway when it rang. She wasn't lying outright, but she wasn't telling the full truth either. Finally, after another tense dinner, her phone buzzed. She stood, glanced at the screen, and answered it in a low voice. She walked out of the room. David followed silently and caught only the last words before she ended the call. I'll try to help, but I can't promise anything. She turned and saw him standing there. Her face tensed. You called Mark, didn't you? She asked. I had to, David said. You asked me to trust you, but you've kept me out of this from the start. She looked exhausted. Mark's in more trouble than I thought. The people he used to run with, they want him back, or they want him quiet. What does that mean? They're threatening him. They know he's out. They think he has information that could put them away. He doesn't, but that doesn't matter to them. David felt the weight settle in. So we're in the middle of something criminal? In our own home? I didn't plan for any of this, she said. He just showed up after he got out. He had no one else. And when I realized what he was dealing with, I couldn't turn my back. You still should have told me. I was scared, not just for him, but for us. I didn't know what you'd do. I thought maybe I could shield you from it. David shook his head. We're past that now. What do they want from him? He doesn't even know for sure. They've been sending messages, vague threats, watching him. David's chest tightened. And you've been bringing that threat to our front door. I didn't know what else to do. Later that evening, Mark arrived. Rachel had asked him to come over so he and David could finally talk face to face. When he stepped inside, the tension was thick. Mark stood straight, no longer looking over his shoulder, but clearly aware that this conversation mattered. They sat down across from each other, Rachel nearby but silent. David spoke first. I need to understand who you really are, not just what Rachel told me. Mark nodded. I was 19 when I got into trouble. I stole cars, ran with a crew that was into worse things than I ever realized. I got caught, did 10 years, got out clean. I didn't know anyone, or so I thought. You said they're watching you. They are. I've seen the same car parked near the places I go. No plates, no movement, just waiting. I don't know what they want, but I can't stick around to find out. So what's your plan? Mark glanced at Rachel, then back to David. I have a contact in Brazil, someone who helps guys like me start over. It's not glamorous, but it's a clean break. No connections, no baggage. David leaned back. You brought danger to my house, Mark. Whatever you went through, you should have known better. I do. That's why I'm leaving. Before they could continue, Rachel stepped in. Before you go, there's something else. Greg. David turned sharply. What about him? I didn't tell Mark everything. Not until now. Mark's voice dropped. Greg recorded my sister. You didn't think I should know that? David explained briefly how Greg had shown him the videos, how he'd confessed his obsession. Mark's face darkened. I'm not letting that slide, and he said. David raised a hand. I don't want things getting worse. I'm not stupid, Mark replied, but people like Greg don't stop unless they're given a reason. The next day, David walked up to Greg's house. Greg opened the door, already nervous. That man you filmed, David said, he's Rachel's brother, and he just got out of prison after 10 years. Now he knows what you did. Greg's face turned white. David didn't wait for a response. He turned and walked away. 10 minutes later, Mark knocked on Greg's door. Greg opened it cautiously, only to be met with a hard punch that knocked him down. Nothing broken, nothing permanent. But the message was clear. "If you ever record her again," Mark said, standing over him, "you'll regret it for the rest of your life." Greg nodded, clutching his face. Mark didn't say another word. He walked away. Back at the house, he turned to Rachel and David. "It's time. I need to disappear. If I stay, I put both of you at risk." Rachel started to argue, but he raised a hand. "You saved me once. Don't let me ruin your life." He left that evening. The day after Mark left, the house felt unusually quiet. Rachel stood at the kitchen window staring out at the empty street. David sat at the table, sipping coffee that had long gone cold. Neither spoke. It wasn't just Mark's absence that filled the space. It was everything that had built up over weeks of secrets, surveillance, and confrontation. Later that morning, David opened the closet in the hallway and pulled down a box marked "Important Documents." Without asking, Rachel knew what he was doing. "You're serious?" she asked. He nodded. "We need a fresh start. This neighborhood, Greg, the history now attached to this place. I don't want to stay here." Rachel didn't argue. After everything, she felt the same. Over the next week, they began preparing the house for sale. They boxed up books, sorted furniture, and removed anything that reminded them of the past month. Greg kept his distance. David hadn't seen him since Mark's warning, and the silence was welcome. One evening, Rachel found David outside, sitting on the porch steps, staring at the driveway. "You okay?" she asked, sitting beside him. "I've been thinking," he said. "This whole thing started because I didn't know what was happening in my own home. I was completely in the dark. I didn't mean to shut you out." "I know," he replied, "but it made me realize we weren't as connected as I thought." Rachel nodded. "We hid too much from each other. I was trying to protect you, but I ended up making things worse." David looked over. "I don't want to live like that again. If something's wrong, we deal with it together. No more keeping the peace by hiding the truth." "Agreed," she said. A few days later, Mark called from Brazil. The number was unfamiliar, international. Rachel answered on speakerphone. "I made it," Mark said. "Things are rough, but I'm safe. I found a place to stay through my contact. Might even have a job soon. It's not glamorous, but I'll survive." Rachel smiled faintly. "I'm glad you're okay." "Thank you for everything. And David, thanks for not turning your back on me." David responded, "Take care of yourself. That's all we want." After the call ended, Rachel turned to David. "You didn't have to forgive him." "I didn't," David said, "but I understood him. And you." They continued preparing for the move. Realtors came, paperwork was signed, and within a month, the house was listed. They found a smaller property outside the city, something rural, quiet, surrounded by space instead of fences and neighbors. On their last night in the old house, David and Rachel stood in the living room with everything packed around them. "Feels like we're leaving a battlefield," Rachel said. "Not leaving," David replied, "escaping." They turned off the lights and walked out. The move wasn't just about geography, it was about shedding the tension that had built between them. Trust wasn't fully restored, but they were rebuilding it, piece by piece. The new place offered no familiar landmarks, no lurking neighbors, no cameras, just space to breathe. Meanwhile, back in the old neighborhood, Greg remained a ghost. Word had gotten around that he'd been involved in something strange. A few neighbors stopped speaking to him. Others watched him with suspicion. The look on his face after Mark's visit had stayed with him, a permanent reminder of how far he'd crossed the line. He'd underestimated how real things could get when obsession turned into action. As for David and Rachel, they adjusted to their new surroundings, slowly but surely. The days became routine again. Quiet mornings, shared meals, open conversations. They talked more, about everything. Sometimes even about Mark, though less and less as time passed. One afternoon, David checked the mail and found a letter with no return address. Inside was a photo. Mark standing in front of a modest building, holding up a small, "Now hiring" sign with a grin on his face. On the back, a message written in rough handwriting. "Doing things the right way, finally. Mark." David showed it to Rachel, who laughed softly. He actually smiled. They pinned the photo to the fridge. That evening, as they sat outside watching the sun dip below the tree line, Rachel leaned over. "We could have lost everything," she said. "We almost did. But we didn't." "No," David said, taking her hand. "We didn't." Months passed and the new house settled into a rhythm. The quiet countryside brought a different kind of peace, one that didn't need to be earned through confrontation or explanation. David and Rachel no longer felt watched, judged, or surrounded by unsaid things. The past wasn't forgotten, but it was no longer dictating the present. They each took small steps towards something better. David started working fewer hours. He'd taken on freelance IT clients instead of returning to the 9 to 5. He fixed up an old shed on the property and turned it into a home office. He spent more time outside, planted a new garden, not because he needed the distraction, but because it gave him space to think without pressure. Rachel took up community work. She joined a local outreach program helping former inmates reintegrate into society. It was quiet, anonymous work in a town where no one knew her or her story. She didn't do it for redemption. She just wanted to give someone else the chance Mark had almost missed. Their conversations changed too. What used to be guarded became direct. When they disagreed, they spoke about it instead of dancing around it. The trust wasn't automatic, but it was being built honestly, piece by piece, day by day. Then one morning, David received an email with no subject line. It was from a burner account, but the message was unmistakably from Mark. "They found me, or at least they came close. But I'm handling it. Nothing illegal, just moving again. If you ever wonder if what you did mattered, tell Rachel it did. I'm not who I was. I'm trying every day." Attached was a blurry photo, Mark standing next to a food truck with a small group of young men. Behind him was a painted sign in Portuguese, "Nova Chance, New Chance." David called Rachel over. She stared at the image for a while, then smiled. "He looks like he's trying," she said. "He is," David replied. "And you gave him that shot." Rachel didn't say anything for a moment. "I used to think keeping secrets protected people, but I've learned the opposite. Truth is the only thing that keeps people close." David nodded. "We lived in the same house, but we didn't really see each other. Now, I feel like we're building something for real." They printed the photo and placed it next to the first one on the fridge. Quiet reminders, not of the danger, but of the growth. Months later, Rachel gave a talk at a local community center. She didn't share the full story, but she spoke about the importance of transparency in relationships, how people assume silence is safety, and how love doesn't mean shielding someone from the truth. It means facing it together. Afterward, a woman approached her, asking if she'd be willing to mentor someone just out of prison. Rachel agreed without hesitation. That night, she told David about it over dinner. "You really are turning this into something good," he said. "I want to. It helps me feel like it all meant something." He reached across the table and took her hand. It did. Back in their old neighborhood, Greg sold his house within a year. Word spread that he'd moved out of state, somewhere quiet. No one missed him. The camera he used to spy on Rachel, it was found in the trash by a neighbor weeks later. Broken, smashed. David never followed up. He didn't care where Greg went. What mattered was that he was gone. For David and Rachel, the trauma didn't vanish. It lived beneath the surface. But they chose to carry it rather than be controlled by it. They had arguments. They had setbacks. But every time, they returned to the same rule. No more silence. One summer evening, as they sat outside watching the trees sway in the wind, Rachel turned to David and said, "Do you ever think about how close we came to losing everything?" "All the time," he said, "but sometimes losing everything is the only way you realize what's really worth saving." Rachel leaned her head against his shoulder. They said nothing more. They didn't need to.